When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all I killed with now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
Hey, I'm Gary Goddard, and you are listening to Crazy Train Radio. And Crazy Train Radio with the engineer is drinking whiskey, I think.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. I'm actually happy to chat with this guy because, and as you'll hear this, you will know why I remember him from my childhood. He has his hands and has had his hands on many different avenues and arts throughout his life, whether it be working with theme parks, actual rides at theme parks. He's written, directed shows, but most people know him. He is probably best known movie-wise for his one picture, Masters of the Universe from 1987. But like I said, there's many layers to this onion. Mr. Gary Goddard, how you doing, sir?
Good. How are you? Thank you for that introduction. It's good to hear.
Yeah, thank you. It's all positive as we were talking about doing this. Keep things on the up and up. Cheers, sir.
Cheers. My coffee. Where'd it go?
All right. So, first and foremost, what is going on currently in the world of Gary Goddard?
There's a number of things. I've been working on a project in China. It's not a theme park, but it's a themed retail, entertainment, and dining RD&E kind of complex based on an IP over there. But I can't say too much about that right now. But I was over there for 4 months in China from April to August at the tail end of the pandemic. That was pretty interesting time to be there. And then I still have my hands on a few film projects, not as a director, but as a producer. And then continuing to work on themed projects, which are starting to kind of happen again now that the pandemic's over. So staying pretty busy, all things considered.
That is a good thing. And, we're going to bounce around a little bit here during this conversation, but doing some, obviously, like I said, I know you from Masters because that was one of my childhood films that I drove my parents nuts with at 2, 3, 4 years old because the movie came out when I was about 2.5, 3 years old.
Wow.
Born in 84. So it was one of those, it was such a dichotomy because I had cousins that introduced me to Nightmare on Elm Street and at that age, and it was Masters that was on constant loop in my household. But I was doing some homework on you and I was interested, so I'll ask, but I was surprised to learn that you had a little hand in Candyland and some reimagination, I guess is the word to use.
Yeah. Well, actually, the game existed even when I was a child. I played that game with my grandmother.
Hence the reimagination.
Truly, it is the first game a kid plays because you don't have to read and you don't have to count. It's all colors. You move to the red or the blue, or whatever. But in 1984, I had just left Imagineering, Disney Imagineering, and started my own company around that time, 1980. And in 83, 84, somewhere in there, we were working on a couple of things. We created the Snuggle Bums for Milton Bradley. And Milton Bradley also had Monopoly, and they also had Candyland. And character licensing was becoming a big thing at that point because of Star Wars and everything. And so Milton Bradley liked our work, and they said, they had a meeting with us. They said, look, we're toying with the idea of adding characters to Candyland because I guess, I don't know if you realize, but until then, there were no characters other than the little brother and sister. They're taking the walk. And back then, the walk was following the path to home, sweet home. It was to get home. And so when they came to us, they said, we're thinking of adding characters, to capitalize on character merchandising. Can you help us with that? And I said, yeah, we definitely can. And long story short, we created the characters, and along with the characters, we added a villain, Lord Licorice, in the Licorice Forest, and we created the Candy Castle, which stood for King Candy, and then Queen Frostine of the Ice Cream Sea. All the lands were there. The Ice Cream Sea was there. The Peppermint Forest was there. Gumdrop Mountains was there. The Peanut Brittle House was there. All those things existed. So what we tried to do was create characters that would live in those worlds. And that's a funny story because we did it. They liked the characters. Then they had their people do the new board game. And in the board game, they took out all of the lands and just had the characters.
In which the characters were influenced for.
Yeah. And I called them and I said, you can't take out the lands. That's what ignites the kids' imagination. You want to go to the Gumdrop Mountains. Those characters were designed to go with those places. And they said, well, we don't know how that would be done. So I said, well, I'll do it. Send me your ride path and I'll have my guys. And we had Rebecca Mills was the character designer. She had worked for Disney and everyone. She worked for me at that time. She'd left Disney. And then we had Michael Humphreys, who was a background painter for Disney. And so basically, 2 Disney artists did that game board, with the characters and the lands. We put it all back together and sent it to them, and they did it. And then they were so when you're working with a big corporation like that, they have their crown jewels, and their crown jewels were Monopoly and Candyland. And they sold X amount of games every year. And they're always afraid as executives that they don't know what makes the magic. And they're afraid if they change anything, it might ruin it. So they paid to manufacture 2 entire sets of the games, multiple versions of the game in the box, everything, without any marketing or anything. They just put them on the shelves in 2 stores in the Midwest. I think one in Chicago, and I can't remember where the other one was. And they just wanted to see that without any marketing, would these things sell at least as well as the game without the characters, and have the new cover that we did for them, the cover with the characters. And the news is that the games doubled and tripled what the other games did. So that was it. That's when they decided, okay, we're going with this. And they went national. So yeah, that's one of the things. A lot of people don't realize that we created the characters for Candyland.
Yeah, I heard that in a different interview. I was like, no shit. Like it don't surprise me knowing what I know about you with the hands in many cookie jars, but it was still cool to hear that story. I'm glad you actually told it there.
Yeah.
But going way back, from what I understand, you grew up in Santa Barbara.
Yep.
And theater was really the start for you.
Yes.
Because not only was theater a start for you, you got into writing musicals and such as a young age. So why does it feel like, and at least on this side of things, that you are a jack of all trades, master of none? Because like I said, there's been so many different avenues you've taken on this road called life.
Yes, it's true. And I like, I don't know if any of your readers have ever read the Prydain Chronicles, the Book of Three, but Taran, the book Taran Wanderer, I always think of that because when he's trying to figure his life out after he's gone through the first 3 books of all these adventures, the 4th book is this book where he wanders and he meets with a sculptor and he meets with a blacksmith and he meets with a weaver, and they each give him their philosophies of life. The blacksmith says life is like a forge; it's going to pound you, and you have to be strong. And then the sculptor who makes the pottery says life is like clay; you have to shape it and you have to mold it. But it was the weaver that really makes sense. She says life is like a loom. You weave the threads of your life and you don't really see the pattern until you're at the end and you look back on the pattern of what you did. So to some degree, this always resonates in my head. My blessing and my curse was I really loved everything. I grew up going to Disneyland once a year because we were an hour and a half away in Santa Barbara from Disneyland once it opened, where my family would go. And I loved movies. I loved musicals. I loved Errol Flynn, Gene Kelly musicals, Errol Flynn adventure films, Walt Disney films, Jason and the Argonauts, all that stuff. And then I was in theater. In theater, I discovered not only musicals but all the classics. So I studied Moliere and Shakespeare and Arthur Miller and everything else. So I am this weird dichotomy of having read Doc Savage and John Carter of Mars and Dune and Lord of the Rings when I was in high school and college, while I was also doing Shakespeare and Moliere and Arthur Miller and everything else in theater. So and then I love musicals and I loved animation and I love theme parks. So yeah, it was hard, but my goal in life was to, early on in the 8th grade, I remember telling Tony Christopher, who was Tony Jenkins then, whose mother was my first grade teacher, by the way, and we started, the company together back in the day. I said in 8th grade to him, you know what I want to do? I want to be able to get up in the morning like Walt Disney probably does. That's my imagination where he does. He gets up and he says, I'm going to work on a theme park today. I'm going to go work on a movie today. I'm going to, you imagine it without all the problems of having a studio course, but I said, I just want to do things that make people happy. And I want to be able to work in all these things. And it turns out that, for whatever reasons I did, I have a unending curiosity. It's the same today. That's what led me down the path for Terminator 2 3D. No one had ever attempted that. Everyone said it would fail. The forum shops at Caesars, the retail complex theme, every retail expert said that will never work. Spider-Man 3D ride that everybody takes credit for that now. Nobody believed in that ride. Everybody tried to shoot it down because we were doing new things that were, taking existing technologies but combining them in new ways to create different kind of experiences. And I look back now and I say, everyone talks about immersive, but if you look at what we were doing from the forum shops through Spider-Man 3D, Conan the Barbarian, everything we did was immersive. And that brings me back to what you said. It's all theater. My theater background has informed everything I've done, whether it's movies or theme parks or whatever.
Well, before I completely move on from theater side of things, I did here, and we know everything on the internet is true, as we were joking when we were talking, before this over the past couple of days. There was a rumor that you were involved with a special theater event of the famous show Jesus Christ Superstar. So what was that?
Yeah, we did. I was very young then. Tony and I directed, he choreographed in 1976 a production of Jesus Christ Superstar at the Santa Barbara County Bowl, an outdoor theater. And we were able to get the original stars of the motion picture, Ted Neely, Carl Anderson, and Yvonne Elliman to star in that. It was really interesting, unique production. And we had a great sound man, a guy who had done worked with all the major rock acts who happened to live in Santa Barbara, and he volunteered to do the sound system, an incredible sound system. And unbeknownst to me, he was recording every night the shows. He had them on these little digital mini tapes. I don't know if they were digital back then, but they were very high quality. So recently, some of those, I guess some of that we printed an album from it, but we only did, I think, 100 copies or 300, just enough for the cast and company. They weren't for sale. They were for the cast and company who were in the show. And I guess someone got a hold of one of those. And I just understood recently that there's been some, furor on the net. Yeah. And so, I directed that, and Tony Christopher choreographed it. And then we did it again a year later at the Concord Pavilion down near San Francisco, again with Ted and Carl. And then we did the national tour. But the one you're talking about was this one that was kind of under the radar. And then, it was we had the rights from, at that time, MTI, Musical Theater National, had the rights, not Andrew. And we had the rights to do it. So it wasn't like a bandit production, but it was basically a community production, what we used to call pro amateur. We brought pros in for the leads, the stars. We surrounded them with people from Santa Barbara. Now, Santa Barbara is a great theater town, so we had great voices in every role. I think the live recording has an energy that very few other recordings have because it is live.
Yeah, and there's a certain energy. And I've been fortunate enough to talk to people, whether it be actors for film, theater, or musicians, or what, different genres in the 10 and a half years of doing this. And there is a certain energy when you are live, what I call live. And theater would be in that live atmospheres, where when you're shooting a movie, you're doing this or doing that, TV or whatever the case is, you can go back and let's do that again. When you're live with a theater, guess what? You got no net, buddy. Yeah.
No, live entertainment, live shows. I think we all go to theater. I still go to theater a lot. I'm going to go to New York in a couple of weeks to see some of the new shows there. You go in the hopes of the night you go there, you'll be there on one of those really magical nights where everything clicks and everything. Live shows are great, but sometimes you'll be in a theater when it's just electric between the audience and the performers. And I remember those shows, the ones I'm at where that just happens. I saw a production of Amadeus with Frank Langella in New York, and he was so great in Amadeus. Okay, he was so great. He did the monologue at the end of Act 2, that monologue where he finally determines, I will defy God, and you have cursed me, and you've blessed that moron over there, and he does that whole monologue, and I am not kidding you. He ended, the lights went down, the house lights went up, total silence, wasn't even applause, nothing. Everyone was, including me, everyone was just stunned. It seemed like it was a minute. It was probably only 15 seconds, 20 seconds. But people were so stunned, they didn't get out of their seats. The house lights came up for the intermission, and then suddenly applause, and people got up and went back. But that performance is what made me think of him for Skeletor. It happened many years before, but I never, because Amadeus, he wasn't evil. He was someone who felt that he had a mission, that he had a blessing from God, and that he was then cursed. He was forgotten. And I felt that kind of subtext for Skeletor would be great, because Skeletor doesn't see himself as a bad guy. He sees himself as a guy that's, trying to do what he thinks is best. And so I wanted that Shakespearean kind of quality, and also that quality he had in Amadeus. That's what led me to Frank. So it does show you how one domino can lead to another.
And you reference it there as far as believing in you're not evil, but you're for the cause, I guess is the best way to put
Yeah.
it in this. And I always think of some of my friends in the wrestling industry, and like some of them are legends in the field and stuff.
Mhm.
And a lot of them were heels or the bad guys. And the good ones, and yeah, it's another form of live entertainment and such.
Right.
But the good ones, the heels especially, were you believed in what your reasoning was
Yeah.
in the story you were trying to tell. And we may not like you for that reasoning. You're boo, dude, whether it's the theater, wrestling, movies, whatever. You hate the heel, but it's like the good ones, you really believed in what your cause was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But you mentioned going to Disney as a youngster.
Mhm.
And as you went to school and all, as we fast forward, you had the opportunity to meet the 9 old men, which were
Oh, yeah.
Disney's right-hand men as far as animation and stuff. And those guys were involved with, like Snow White and all those early pictures. What was
Yeah.
your experience getting to know those guys?
Oh, it was unbelievable, fantastic. I was when I was young, I was totally into Disney animation. My grandmother and aunt all thought I was into Disney. They would get me Mickey Mouse dolls for Christmas, which I didn't want. They didn't understand. I was focused on the studio and on animation. The first Art of Animation book that cost, I think, $6.50 at Disneyland, which was the one they made during Sleeping Beauty. And I just begged my parents to get me that. And, they could barely afford to take us, I was lower middle class family. It was a big deal for them to save up the money just to go to Disneyland back then, but to get a book like that. But they did get it for me. So that had the first picture I saw of all of them in the sweatbox, the 9 old men named, and there they were looking at the screen. It's a very famous black and white picture of them. And so then I read and then I would follow and I couldn't. I read an article that Les Clark had a second house in Santa Barbara, that he would be up there on the weekends. So I just got the phone book. Back in those days, it was a phone book. You looked up the white pages. There it was, Mr. and Mrs. Les Clark. So I just dialed the phone. And again, I dialed the phone, and woman answers the phone. Clark residence, may I help you? I said, yeah. Is this the home of Les Clark? Yes, it is. May I help you? Is this the Les Clark that works for Disney? Yes, may I help you? I said, this is when I was I couldn't even drive yet. I think I was in 8th grade. And I said, I was wondering if I could speak to Mr. Clark. And I hear her go, Les, it's for you. So he gets on the phone. And I just said, well, I'm a big fan. I know that you animated on Sorcerer's Apprentice. I know all his credits. This was a time when they didn't have fans and they weren't known. But here I was, this kid who knew what he'd worked on the phone. And I said, could I come visit you? And he said, sure. So my mom drove me up there 2 weekends later, and I had a little lunch with him at his house. He invited me to the studio. But my mom wouldn't drive on freeways back then. So my high school theater teacher volunteered to drive me down to the studio. That was my first time, Les Clark. And then Les walked me around the studio. Back in the day, they were working on Robin Hood at that time. Ken Anderson had all the storyboards up, and he introduced me to Frank Thomas, Milt Call, Ollie Johnson. He introduced me to everybody. He acted like I was, like I wasn't some little 8th or 9th grader, like I was just a guy, an animation, fan. And of course, every time I met them, I also from that book knew what they had animated. So I would say to Frank Thomas, "Oh yeah, I know you and Ollie worked on the 3, fairy godmothers, in the thing, and I know that you guys did it." So they kind of laughed, all of them. They thought it was interesting to have this fan, and then I stayed in touch with them all those years. So I would go down and visit, and especially later when I became a student at Cal Arts, which Walt Disney funded that school. And the first year, there was a very anti-Disney sentiment at the school by a lot of the people, but I was very pro-Disney, so they were always happy to have me visit the studio, and I would go as often as I could, and got to know them quite well. The only one I didn't get to know at first was Mark Davis, because he'd already moved over to Imagineering. But after about a year or 2 or 3, my first year at Cal Arts, or second year, I went over to Imagineering to meet Mark, and Mark was in a meeting, so Herb Ryman came to the lobby. And he was the one assigned to give me a little tour. And again, those back in the days there weren't any official tours or anything. It was really, just unique cases like that. So there was no one there to give you a tour except the guys that worked there. So Herb Ryman gave me my first tour. I got to know Herb really well. So I would say that I was really mentored by Mark Davis, Herb Ryman, when I wound up going to Imagineering years later. But I knew Frank and Ollie and Milt Call and even Wooly Reitherman. Wooly a little less, but I met Wooly. I met all of them. Eric Larson, everybody, even Ward Kimball, all of them. But it was really Frank, Ollie, Milt, Mark Davis that I knew the best.
Now, you mentioned about the book, and I'm familiar with the book and the photo and everything else like that you are talking about. But do you think being inquisitive at such a young age has made you the best artist in whatever medium you were working in?
Yeah, without a doubt. I look back and I was writing musicals in high school. I was working on little animated things in high school. I was writing the musicals and staging them and directing them and starring in them with my friends and making little home movies, even in the 8th and 9th grade. And then meeting people like Mark Davis and meeting people like, I had an acting coach in Santa Barbara, Bradford Dillman. Bradford Dillman was in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, but more famously, he was the original in Long Day's Journey into Night on Broadway. He was the original lead. He did that show with Frederick March, and he was one of the original members, one of the younger members of the original Actors Studio, with Eva Marie Saint and Marlon Brando and all those guys. And he lived in Santa Barbara with his wife Susie Parker, and because he was an actor, actors don't work a lot of time. They have a lot, but he lived in Montecito, and he did a little tour of shows in Santa Barbara one year, and he handpicked like 7 or 8 young students. I was one of them. Timothy Bottoms was another one, to be in an acting class that he offered to teach on Sundays. He didn't charge any money. He was just doing this because he wanted to give back. So I was able to learn acting from Brad Dillman, who was actually in the Actors Studio, not a student of or a student of a student of. So yeah, I was very fortunate in my life to have that kind of background, because that knowledge of acting informs your not ability to act, but to direct and write and everything else. And then the 9 Old Men, knowing Frank and Ollie, I learned so much just listening to them. And they would always be working on a scene when I would come in. They'd show me what they're working on and why they made this choice. And Milt Call was really unbelievable about that. Milt would jump out of his seat and he'd act out. He was acting out at that time. And one of the times he was really jealous that Mark got Cruella de Vil, but then he got Medusa in The Rescuers. And this was his chance to do, and he had, in those days, they had records. They had their timing. You know how it works. They have a timing sheet with all the dialogue in the timing sheet, with all the vowels and consonants and whatever it's going to be. And they have a record. In those days, it was a record. And they put the record on, and the record would have the voice track of the actor or actress, and they would follow it. And he would put that on for Medusa. And he did the scene he acted out the scene in The Rescuers where Snoops wants to see the eye of the thing. He goes, let me see. And she goes, no, she pulls it away. And he acted out the whole thing as he was drawing it and roughing out in his thing. It was pretty amazing afternoon. And then when I got to visit the Imagineering the first time, Mark Davis, in the back, there was the Western River Expedition. I don't know if you know, but there was going to be, with the Big Thunder in Florida, there was going to be the Western River Expedition, which was going to be a Western version of the Pirates of the Caribbean, a dark ride in the cowboys, Indians, and all that kind of stuff. And there was a model made it the way they did them at head height, which you walk through, and your eyes are the boat, basically. Everything's built to scale, everything, the lighting, the sound, the music, everything. Mark Davis walked me through that model when I was still at Cal Arts. And he told me every choice he made, how he staged every scene, how everything had to read, all that training as an animator of staging to tell a gag is at work when you see Mark's work in the Jungle Cruise or Pirates or these things. And I really got it when he took me through the Western River Expedition and how he staged everything, how the boat came around to reveal a scene, how it came, So throughout my life, I've been very fortunate to work with any number of people that had brilliant careers in their fields. And I think that my natural curiosity, especially when you're young, I mean, if anyone's listening, if you're young, don't be afraid to pick up that phone. If you're young, you bring an enthusiasm to things that people that have been in the industry will recognize, and they will probably bend over backwards to help you. That was always my experience. And I was never calling them for that reason. I was calling them because I really did respect them and I wanted to meet them. I wanted to talk to them. But I would say that all of those things inform you in a way that it's better than any classroom you go to. You really learn from mentors who have done it. It's not theoretical. It's practical. It's really coming from them and from their knowledge base of years of doing these things. So yes, curiosity is good. If you're young, go for it.
Well, with that being said, as I pour myself another drink, I think it's a good time to ask this question. And obviously, I know you because I obviously know your history and everything else like that. And I appreciate the time that we're putting into this, that you are a storyteller at heart. But with everything you said there, as far as the education firsthand you picked up on, when did it click for you in terms of establishing a pace for whatever the project is you were working on, whether it be the movie, theater, theme park work? Because obviously in storytelling, you have to have a pace to make whatever the project is good. So when did it click for you, the establishing a pace for whatever it is you're working on?
Well, I think that came inherently for me when I started directing my own musicals in high school, and then I directed live shows, Superstar, all those things. And so you learn as a director, especially live shows, that you have to establish a pace and keep that pace going, or you lose your audience. It's the same thing in films. The directors that know how to, the Jim Camerons and the Steven Spielbergs, and not that everyone, they don't always make it work, but generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, those guys are, batting 100. And I think it's interesting because I really noticed in theme parks, and part of that is because, I'm in a very unique situation, having been a screenwriter and been a director of movies and a creator of television shows and a writer of some of those treatments and scripts and stuff, and having done theme parks, I bring a full set of knowledge to everything I do as a writer and a director and a producer. So that combination of things is rather unique. In addition to which, I was always interested in special effects, so I have a pretty good understanding of effects and how they get done, animatronics, etc. So what happens in the theme park business is a lot of people wind up being directors who don't really have a lot of experience in directing, or they're art directors who become show directors, or they're production designers or architects that are trying to do that. And they tend to think of the aesthetic only, of the look, of what the look is going to be, or perhaps it's someone who thinks the soundtrack. And here's a good example. Here's the best example I can give you. I don't know if you heard, there's a big show in Las Vegas that just opened. It used to be Le Rêve. Le Rêve was at the Wynn. It was this major multi-$100-million show with water and everything, and Dragon had done it. And then years later, they redid it, and they took Dragon out, and they redid it. But now they shut it down, and they really redid it. They took all the water out. It's gone. And I went to see it. I went to see it because it's closing. The new show, over $160 million show that opened less than a month ago, is going to close in 2 weeks. $600,000 operating costs every week for the 120 crew and cast. Okay. It opened 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's closing in 2 weeks because no one's going. And so I wanted to see it because I learn sometimes from things that are, disasters instead of hits. You can learn a lot. And I wanted to see for myself, how could a disaster that big happen? I'm not going to name the people involved, but there was a very creative guy involved who's famous for doing puppets and masks and stuff, and he's fantastic, and we work with him, and he is amazing at what he does. There's no one better. Then there was a producer who doesn't have a lot of experience producing, and there was another guy who was a line producer who understands budget stuff. Those were the 3 creative leads. So the answer is because they all came from because they're not writers and they're not show creators, and they don't do that. They're coming from a different place. And so this project, having spent $160 million, it's one big production number and big battle and big this and big effects and big this and blah, blah, blah after another. But it has no heart. It has no soul. It has no message. There's nothing underlying it. There's no heart and soul to the piece. So you can lay on loud soundtrack and loud drums and 50 performers on stage, and you can stage big battles. But ultimately, you could just watch the audience. And by the way, even at the show I was at, it was maybe a third full, and everyone is just sitting there numb. So that's the issue, and they don't understand pacing. They don't understand bring the show up, bring the show down, bring it up, peaks and valleys and all those kind of things. And they fail to make an emotional connection with the audience. And so my whole big thing is, no matter what I do, how do we create an emotional connection with the audience? And in the terms of T2 3D or the Spider-Man ride or Jurassic Park ride or any of those rides, you have to find the essence of those worlds, and then don't try and recreate the movie. You can't make a movie in a theme park ride. You have to find a way in that connects to the same emotional resonance of the movie, of that world building. But now you have to present it in a different way. You have to put people in it somehow. So, and every single project has a different puzzle that you have to kind of figure out. It's not easy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the one thing I will say, that because the theme park medium, whether it's a ride or animatronics or whatever it is so different, the biggest piece that's usually missing from these attractions is pacing. They don't understand how to pace a ride or an animatronic show. They don't understand how to keep it moving so that it engages the audience. And along with pacing, you have to have that emotional core. You have to really find a way to bring the audience into it so they're with you.
Well, I'm going to combine something here, because you, in telling that story about the Vegas show and stuff, and I want to keep on the theme of pacing if I can. Obviously, when you got hired by Disney and you were working in Florida at the time, there was a similar story that I heard, that you were working on a particular project. You shut the project down for like a week or so, brought in professionals, kind of reset everything up, but then open things back up. But also, you mentioned we're talking about pacing with the animatronics and all that stuff there. So if you can touch on that, because obviously things here in 2023 are different than, say, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, that pacing and the storytelling with the technology is completely different.
Yeah. Well, the show you're talking about is Hoop-de-Doo. That was a Wild West dinner show that was only supposed to run one summer. I was originally brought in as the co-director with Larry Billman. Larry Billman was the director and writer of the book, and he worked with Tom Adair, who wrote the songs, I believe. And the idea was to put this dinner show in as part of the summer college workshop program at Walt Disney World. So I was brought in to co-direct with Larry. And as we were rehearsing it with these college kids who were brought in from all over the U.S., 6 different cast members and 2 standbys, so 8. And they were auditioned by videotape. They sent in.
Would this been the internship kind of program? Kids coming in?
Yeah, kind of like the it's the more well-known one is the All-American Marching Band that every summer they bring in college performers, but they decided to do one for musical theater. It was because Imagineering had designed the Pioneer Hall as a food hall in Fort Wilderness, and Fort Wilderness was the campground. And this place had a cafeteria and had this, and then it had this little theater where they were going to show, the thought was they'd show nature movies because they thought nature movies would appeal to people. But if you're living out in nature, you don't really want to see nature movies. So that didn't really work. So they were looking for something, and they went to the entertainment division and said, what can you do? And Larry and Tom Adair came up with this idea of Hoop-de-Doo. And in fact, I even know the whole history of it. He had seen a show called El Grande de Coca-Cola in New York. It was a little off-Broadway show, a little funny show. And that was the inspiration ultimately for what became Hoop-de-Doo. But that's another, El Grande de Coca-Cola, very funny show. But I'll tell you about that some other time. But so we were putting the show together there with these college kids who came in from all over the place. And then Larry had to duck out a couple of times. So I wound up staging some of the musical numbers, and I rearranged the dessert was originally at the end. I said to Larry, we should put the dessert before the grand finale so that when the grand finale's over, the show's over. They've already had their dessert and coffee. Everybody can leave. And so we did structural things like that. We did a number of things. Anyway, it was coming up to the end of the summer, and I get called in because Larry was only there for 2 weeks, and he had to go back to LA after the show opened, right? And when it opened, the first night, there were only 2 tables of people in the audience. There were more people on stage than in the audience. But having done community theater, I put on my community theater hat and I started making my own flyers for Disney. I used the Disney printing place. I got them to do it. I went to all the concierges at the different Disney hotels. I had a fact sheet because no one knew Hoop-Dee-Doo was there. So I did a fact sheet, how you get to the Fort Wilderness, how you get there, how the thing. I said, when people call in and they want the Polynesian luau, but the Polynesian luau, please tell them about Hoop-Dee-Doo. So basically it worked, and the show started having great word of mouth. And by the end of the summer, every Disney executive was required to see it. Dick Nunes came in there. Dick Nunes was still the big honcho back then, and all the VPs were there. Everybody was raving about the show. But as it neared the end, and by the way, this was people had to pay money. So they were making money from the show. This was a place that was not deriving revenue until that, and now it was. So I got a call one day as the guy that was over there, kind of as this, the overall show coordinator, they used to call him, or show whatever it was, and Dick Ross and Dick Orr, the president of the entertainment division and the vice president in Florida, and they said they sat me down. I was all of 23 then, I think 23 or 24. I'm with the adults in the room. I mean, you're just going to think this is funny, and they say to me, "Well, listen." Disney corporate, they want to continue to run the Hoop-Dee-Doo show because, it's going to close, but they want to keep it open. And I said, okay, that sounds good. So we want to offer contracts to all the cast. And I said, in my naive 23-year-old way, well, you can't do that. And they looked at me like, what do you mean? What do you mean we can't do that? I said, oh, well, you can do it. But, those are college kids who came from all over the U.S. and they're coming here for a summer credit. And I guarantee you, if you offer them contracts, they're all going to sign. But all those parents and all those colleges are going to call up Disney and go, what in the heck? You just enticed my kid to come out there, and now you gave him contracts so they can't go back to school? And they went, Dick Orr, Dick Ross, the head, he looks at me and goes, well, what do we do? And I said, well, we could cast a local professional cast and put them in. We probably only have to shut down for a week or so, to get them on the stage. We could rehearse parallel while they're still doing the show. And he looks at me and goes, can you do that? I said, yeah, I could do that. Absolutely. And so that's what happened. So I arranged the auditions. We used the Contemporary Resort. We booked it out for a Saturday and Sunday. We had a massive call. We put the word out to all the local theater, all the local community. And then they said, we're going to go from, I think we were doing 5 shows a night back then. We're going to go to 7 shows a night, and we're going to do 2 shows a night. So it means we had to cast three actual casts. So we could be able to run 7 days a week, 2 shows a night, and that kind of thing. So we did. And then we put the show up right. And Larry, they wouldn't pay for Larry to fly back out. So I did the whole thing. And Forrest Bayruth came back to the choreography. He did the choreography originally. And so we put it back on its feet, and it did great. And it's been running forever. It's one of the longest shows. It only ever shut down during the pandemic, and it's back up now. So I think it's been running 40 years or something like that.
And, it's funny. You just said something there with when they were questioning you and peppering you with everything. The one major rule, I think, with entertainment, no matter what you do, it's the answer is yes. Then you figure out what the hell you're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know how to do that. Can you ride a horse? Absolutely. Yeah. Can I come train? Or whatever the case is. You go and figure it out after you say yes.
Yeah. So it turned out great, and that wound up being a great calling card. I already knew Mark Davis and John Hench from when I was at Cal Arts, and they did the tours there and stuff. But I was getting a little frustrated at Disney because I wasn't being able to move up fast enough. So I had a week and I had 10 days of vacation coming. I decided I was going to leave Disney World. I was going to go to New York. So I used that time to go to New York and go look around for apartments and stuff. And when I came back, there was a call waiting for me from Orlando Ferrante, who I had not heard of because he was the head of business affairs at Imagineering. And so
out on the West Coast, correct?
On the West Coast, yeah. So I had a call, and they said, Orlando Ferrante called. I said, who's that? He's with Imagineering. And so, okay. So I called him, and he said, well, and I, till this day, I don't know how Mark Davis heard that I was giving my notice to leave Disney. I honestly don't know. But he said, well, Mark heard that you're leaving Disney. He thinks you're a good Disney guy, and he wants you to stay. Would you think about coming to Imagineering. This was a big fork in the road for me because I was going to go to New York and do theater, and but I'd always wanted to work at Imagineering, but I didn't actually think I could because I'm not really a great artist. I'm a good writer.
Did you have a job lined up in New York, though?
No, not yet. But okay. I would have rolled the dice. I wanted to do theater was my other love, so I was going to do that. And by the way, on my 6-7 days I was in New York, as I'm walking along, do you know New York at all? You know Schubert Alley where the post.
Yeah, I do.
I'm walking by there again. I'm like 22, 23, and Bob Fosse is just becoming Bob Fosse. I think Cabaret the movie was out, and as I'm walking by there, he just is walking out the door. No one recognizes him, but I do. So I just walked up to him and said, "Mr. Fosse?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "I'm a big fan of yours, and I've done some musicals in Santa Barbara." And but he goes, "Yeah, well, just I'm walking up to such and such theater. You want to walk with me?" I said, "Yes, I do." So I walked with him for 3 blocks up Times Square to the other theater he was going to, and we talked the whole time. And I said how much he had inspired me and all that kind of thing. And I wrote him a note afterwards, and he wrote me a card back. It's up there on the wall saying it was great meeting you and everything. So again, those kind of moments are inspirational, and you actually glean a lot from them, even though they're maybe short in duration, but they're high on content. Anyway, so I was all jazzed to go to New York, and I got back. But, to be honest, from the time I was a kid, Imagineering was like, I wanted to work in Imagineering, but I never thought I could have got in there because I'm not like an artist like that. My skills are different, And so they said, well, we'll fly you out. And we'll fly you out, and you'll meet with Mark and everything. How soon can you go? I said, well, I'm available. He said, well, can you be out here by Monday? I said, yeah, sure. Give me the flight. I'll be out. Flew out. They flew me out on a Friday. They flew me out first class on Eastern Airlines. Eastern was the Disney airline. They flew me out first class. I was like 23 flying first class. Like, okay, this is cool. Then they put me up at the Universal Sheraton, which was the Universal Sheraton Hotel, which was the only really nice hotel in the Valley at the time, over the whole weekend, so I could be there on Monday morning. Went there on Monday morning. They walked me down the hall to John Hench's room at the end. John Hench, Marty Sklar, Mark Davis, and Orlando. John Hench. Just the 3 of them: John, Mark, and Marty Sklar. And they're like, so you did Hoop-de-Doo. Everyone's raving about that. And the guys have seen it. They go, yeah, that was really fun. What did you do? Oh, blah, blah, blah. So, Mark here thinks you could make a contribution. I said, well, that's great. And everything. And then they go, well, do you draw? I said, no, I don't really draw, especially here. I can do bad napkin sketches and give them my ideas, but, these are artists here. Well, do you write? I said, well, yeah. Yeah, no, I write. I've written some musicals and I've done something. Okay. And Mark, do you have something you could work on? And Mark goes, well, I'm working on the old barn for the Fort Wilderness. I think that'd be a good fit, and he could do that. How does that sound to you, Gary? I said, that sounds great to me. When can you be here? I said, well, I got to fly back and I got to drive my cars. I got to drive back. So I guess I need like a week. He says, okay, can you be here ready to start on Monday? I said, yeah, sure. Well, go up to Orlando's office and he'll make a deal with you and we'll see you on Monday. I was there for all of 30 or 40 minutes, no portfolio, no this, no that. Boom. And I went right into show design. I was right up there in the show design group with my own office next to Albertino and Bill Justice and Exitencio and Claude Coates. And it was unbelievable. Really, really unbelievable.
And I want to get into the movie in a minute, but my last question with theme parks, because obviously you've mentioned it here. Doing the T2 3D, Jurassic Park, there's the Spider-Man ride, there's been all that kind of thing. And we talked about pacing, but what's it like for pacing and the evolving door, I guess you would say, of technology? Because I kind of mentioned it earlier, but for you, with the evolvement of technology and trying to incorporate that, the latest and greatest, with the pacing of the story you tell. But also with that is how much, when designing rides, whether it be the ones that you were known for or stuff you might be working on going forward, as you mentioned when we started, when there is an idea on paper, all right, Gary, we're going to bring your group in. We want to do this ride for whatever. How much does that change from initial concept to the finished product. Oh, and that's a couple year period that's going to be.
Well, it's interesting because it's interesting you bring that up because I just posted on my Instagram my director's notes from April 14th, 1996. It was 2.5 weeks before T2-3D was going to open. And all my handwritten notes, I just decided to put them up because what it shows you there, if you read them, is need to rewrite this, need to add a piece of dialogue here. I surprised myself. I was looking at that going, wow, I need to change the lights here. We need to add this over here. So here's what people don't understand. In any great Broadway show, any great movie, any great TV series or pilot, you don't freeze it from the script. You make it better as you go because not everything in the script is going to work when you put it on its feet, either for budget reasons or for pacing reasons or for character reasons or what you thought was going to happen. And by the way, Motion Pictures, Masters of the Universe, was my first movie. Nothing in the effects world goes the way you think. And remember, that was before digital effects, a lot of practical effects, okay, and a lot of glass shots and a lot of, so nothing goes the way. So you have to be able to improvise on your feet because if you try and stick to the page and it's not working, it's going to suck. It's just not going to work. So I'd forgotten in T2-3D how much. Now, again, my advantage is I wrote it. I mean, Cameron came in and we rewrote a lot of it together. Where Cameron really inputted was on the characters and on the film sequence. But on the two bookends, Act 1 and Act 3, which was live stage with stuff, that's where I really took the lead. Jim took the lead on the film sequence and went out and actually, even John Bruno was going to direct it. But then in the last minute, because he had time, he decided to direct that. And anyway, long story short, what you realize is if you're a writer and director, and in this case, the creator of this thing, I know what I'm trying to get to, and this is not working. So that's not working, so now we have to change. What are we going to do instead? And as you make those changes, you want to make it better, not worse. Make it better. So everything's about making it better. And you have to be able to say, no matter how much money you spent on this gag, if it doesn't work, if it's going to be the Achilles heel of the show, kill it. It doesn't matter what it costs. Kill it. It doesn't work. It's going to slow the show down. Not going to happen. So the Star Trek attraction in Vegas, T2-3D, Spider-Man, it's a bit of a magic act. You get people into that place. You get them into that world. And now the pacing is how you direct their attention and their emotions through sound, through lighting, through staging, through reveals, through non-reveals, through the use of effects, whatever it is. You get them through this. And as you're creating the show, you shed anything that doesn't work. A lot of the shows, like the one I just mentioned, $160 million show, they should have cut 30% of that crap out. It wasn't doing anything to help them. It was just slowing the show down. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Whatever it costs, dump it. Move ahead. So you can go. I literally just put it up today because since it's coming up to the 20, we open on the 27th, I think, of April, right? So I'm putting some T2-3D things up that maybe people haven't seen. And I was going through my directing notes and I went, wow, this is a lot of notes. And by the way, this, as you'll see if you read the thing, the executives demanded to see a run through. I'd only been there. There was someone else that was working on the directing. Not a lot had happened. I'd only been there about 4 days, 5 days. And the top brass, Ron Bancy and everybody at the time, they wanted to see a run through. I said, there's nothing to run through. This is all in pieces. When you're doing a show like this, it's going to eventually be on a program, computer show control system. You do this segment and you do that segment and you do that segment. And then you start to basically merge all these segments together in the show control system. But they wanted to see it. I said, you can't see it. You can see bits and pieces, but you can't see this as a piece because we haven't weaved it together yet. But they demanded to see it. I said, well, you're going to be very disappointed and you're going to be panicking when you see this. But if you want to see it, I mean, you're the bosses, so they came. It was a mess. It was horrible. They looked panic stricken because this thing's supposed to open in 2.5 weeks and they could not imagine. But that's another thing. It was supposed to happen in 3.5 weeks and they moved the deadline up. And I was like, we need that extra week. But anyway, long story short, I had all these notes and I was going through them. It reminded me, and you'll see just some minute notes about just changing a little bit. And then you'll see some major notes that we have to do this, this, and this, everything from soundtrack. We need to add music here. We need to change this. We have to add an effect up here. We have to add this. We have to add that. And I will say Chip Largeman was the project manager for Universal on that project. Chip Largeman is the one who called me and said, I was in LA, you need to get out here. This is not coming together. And I said, I'll be out. I was out there 24 hours later. I got in the plane. I was right out there, and I thought I was going for 3 or 4 days to give notes and go back to Landmark. And I got there and called Landmark and said, I'm here for the duration. I'm going to stick this out. And which I did. And so it's interesting to see how those decisions for pace, it's the same today. Believe me, I don't care what technology you're using. I don't care if you're using the latest, CG stuff. AI is going to come involved like that. There's a human element that's required when you're putting something together to say, put yourself in the audience's situation, in their place, whether it's a ride or a show or a stunt show or whatever it is. And now, as this story unfolds, how do I keep them engaged? How do I not lose them? How do I not overwhelm them? How do I make this thing move with ups and downs, using all of the tools in the toolkit, from music to effects to visuals to lighting to whatever? How do I make this work? And in the case of an IP of some kind, I hate to call them IPs but in case of a world, the world that was built for Jurassic Park, the world that was built in these movies and things, how do I get that essence and get the spirit of that and convey it in this new medium? And that's the challenge. And then the challenge of pacing is unique to each attraction. But I can tell you the secret to dark rides, which a lot of people just miss, which I got from Mark Davis on that walkthrough when I was 20 years old of the Western River Expedition. Basically the people in the boat, you're the camera. And every time you come around a bend, there's a reveal, and the staging should reveal something. And each bend you come around is a new scene, or the dip you take, or the hill you climb, and the reveal at the end. So things keep unfolding, and it's the same thing whether it's T2, 3D, or whatever it is. So I think pacing it's one of the secret sauces that most theme park attractions don't understand.
Absolutely. As somebody who, whenever I take the show on the road, I like to visit the parks, and I tend to pay attention to that kind of thing. But I can't believe how much time has passed already. We're almost at the hour mark, and I appreciate the time. But Masters of the Universe.
Yes.
And like I said earlier, grew up watching this film. I actually just finished watching it about an hour before we jumped on this call to go over my notes and all that stuff. But I want to say it's amazing that when people at the time, well, it's probably mostly critics, shit on it, the film, because it's based off a tour line and whatever, you go down the line. But yet, when you look at, say, my generation, because I'm 38 years old, and I was like I said, a little kid when this film came out.
Mm-hmm.
My generation loves the film. And personal opinion here, folks, and I know you'll shit on me for this. Is it in some ways a corny and cheesy movie? Absolutely. But it's one of those movies that you still fall in love with. I will compare this to, let's say, when people shit on this, and people will understand the cross tie here. Roadhouse, which happens to have Anthony DeLongis in both.
That's true.
But is it, or are they Oscar-winning movies? No. But there is a certain charm about Masters that my generation, and I can only speak for me, but I would think there's a bigger audience that would agree with this, because there are, with social media and stuff, there's Masters groups on Facebook and this and that and whatever. There's a certain charm about the film that we still love. It's the second picture for Dolph Lundgren, and obviously you mentioned earlier Frank Langella as Skeletor and such, who is hands down the character of the movie. But for me personally, and I hope to talk to her again soon, is Meg Foster. And there's just something about her eyes as the evil one.
Yep. I cast her because of those eyes. Absolutely. And when she's a great actress, but
Well, yeah, she's obviously great, but when you're looking at her, those eyes is just when she's. I can't put words to it, but there's just something when she's looking at you or giving a dialogue or what.
Yep.
Meg is one of my favorites of all time, hands down. I don't care, and for multiple roles. But first question with the movie is: are there any sequences that you are aware of that were filmed that ended up on a cutting wood floor that probably should have been in a picture if you had your full say on it?
Yes. I gave into one cut at the very end because they had one preview out in Whittier or somewhere up in Pasadena, and I wasn't at it. And Menahem was there, who owned the studio. And the way we had edited it at the farewell scene, when Courtney Cox's character says goodbye to everybody, they walk in a thing and she goes, wait, and then we go to black. And then we come back in for the rest of the picture. Well, when it went to black, we probably held that a little too long because people started to get up to leave. Menahem thought it was because the movie was too long and the finale was too long. And I fought him and I said, no, the blackout was too long. People actually, they weren't leaving because they were bored. They think the movie was over. They don't understand we hadn't stopped. So that's the problem. Anyway, it was a big deal, and the deadline was approaching. And the one thing I remember is at the preview that I was at before that, the ending brought tears to people's eyes because the ending, I did a production of Godspell years ago, and Godspell has an ending where each of the characters that you've met for the whole show have their own way of saying goodbye to Jesus, the Jesus character. And it's a very touching moment. And there's the moment in Wizard of Oz where she has to say goodbye to each of them. So I came up with an individual thing that she goes to each of them, and then it builds to that moment where she hugs He-Man, right? And I'm telling you, people were tearing up because she had her own goodbye to Tila, her own goodbye to Man-at-Arms, her own goodbye to Gwildor, and then finishing with, and that 30 seconds, 60, I don't know what it was, a minute. Never should have. If I could put one thing back in, it's funny what I'm telling you, right? It's not some big action scene, all this kind of stuff. It's this character-driven moment at the end, and Bill Conti scored it perfectly, and it never quite worked. Conti. And then that ending never quite worked once we made the cut because it was a quick music cut as well, right? It was just all this music, but this little, her theme that play. Oh my God! And when the camera moves in like that when she hugs, because when she hugs He-Man, the camera moves in. He scored that perfect, right? And so the answer to your question is no. There's no big action scene. There's nothing like that that's on the cutting room floor because we had such a tight budget. Pretty much everything we shot, we tried to get in there. But that emotional moment that I should have never given up on, if I could restore that, I would restore it, and I think it would plus the ending so much in terms of the way people relate to her journey, them, her relationship with them. And so that's the answer. I wish I could put that back in the way it was originally cut. You know, my editor, you know who that is, right? Ann Coates. Ann Coates she was the editor of Lawrence of Arabia, for God's sake. She edited Lawrence of Arabia for David Lean. She did The Elephant Man. I mean, she's brilliant, and she was great to work with. I mean, she's gone now, of course, but I mean, I was able to assemble a great team. I mean, the people that worked on that, from Bill Stout to Ann Coates to, I mean, we just, Bill Conti, Frank Langella. I mean, I wanted Frank because, I knew that Dolph, what came with the package. I had a script by David Odell.
And you had Dolph.
I had Dolph. And I knew Dolph had just come off a picture where he had one line. Right. And he was brand new, and he had
Rocky
one line.
4.
I will break you. I will break you. That was his line.
Yeah.
And so I had a read through, and I knew that Dolph at that point anyway was going to need a little support. So I wanted to surround him with a cast of really good actors that could bring out the best in him. And I knew that I had to have. This is not rocket science. The villains, the antagonists, drive a story.
Yes.
The protag. By the way, I also called up Jack Kirby when I was a kid, when he moved to Thousand Oaks, because I lived in South Harbor, and I went to visit him and Roz. Same kind of thing. Roz answered the phone, and Jack Kirby's the one who told me, you're talking that New York, Gary, your villain always has to be more powerful than the hero. Otherwise, why is he a hero? He can't be a hero unless the villain is bigger and more powerful. So, I always remembered that right from the lips of Jack Kirby.
Yeah,
And
it's
so I wanted someone, I didn't want a caricature of Skeletor. I didn't want the guy. I mean, people say the guy in the car. Yeah, but people don't understand. In a live action thing, if you had Skeletor going, ha ha ha, I will come get you, like the cartoon show,
Mhm.
not going to work, So I wanted to make him Shakespearean. I wanted to make him a really powerful guy that He-Man would be not afraid of, but certainly know, okay, this guy is a badass. I can't just walk in and defeat him. He's powerful. And I had this is a great story. They didn't want to pay Frank the money, and Menahem says, Gary, he's in a mask. What do you care? Just put anyone in the mask, and then he can do the voiceover. We'll pay him to do the voiceover. I said, no, Menahem, you have to understand.
there's a physical presence to it.
Yes. I said, when he walks in the room, you have to know that's a king. That's an emperor. The way he sits in a throne, the way he gestures, all of this is important. You can't just put some clown in a costume and say, act like a king. It doesn't work that way. So thank God he listened to me, And by the way, I got Drew Struzan to do the poster. Canada never had a poster like that. And that's another great story, because the head of marketing, when it time to do the poster, she came down with these comps, a typical kind of, Canon photo, photoshopped whatever pictures. I said, no, we got to get Drew Struzan. She goes, Manon will never pay for Drew Struzan. At the time, it was $20,000 for a rendering, for a poster, 3 black and white comps in the color. I said, well, he's got to. He says he wants this to be his Star Wars. We got to get the guy that did Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Plus, this guy's just great. And he goes, he'll never go for it. I said, well, set up a meeting with me. And I went down. Back in those days, you couldn't just order movie posters, but Larry Edmunds' bookstore in Hollywood, I went down and got, I don't know which ones, 5 Drew Struzan posters like Indiana Jones and I don't remember, Back to the Future, Went to my mom's office, laid them all out on the floor, and Osi was there. She was the head of the marketing department at Canon then. And he goes, what is this about? I said, it's about the poster. Said, you want to have a movie like Star Wars and you want to have a movie like Indiana Jones. You need this guy. This guy does those posters and we have to have this guy do them. And he looks him on the floor. He goes, how much? I said, $20,000. Do it. and Drew, to this day, he thinks that's one of his best posters ever. It's on the cover of his book and everything. And I do think it's one of his best pieces. I mean, he's done great pieces, of course, but I was trying to elevate the thing as much as I could all along the way,
Absolutely. And it's, funny. The way you were describing a poster, and I can't think of the names involved, but there's a story I heard and it fits that. And there was another film project of that time period. And I think it might have been one of the projects that Bill Conti was involved with. I can't remember what it was. But it was, somebody said, similar situation. Oh, we don't want to pay for that, all that kind of thing, to bring this person on. Well, the main head honcho with the film, whether it was Stallone or this one or that one, whoever it was, goes, it was Animal House. Thank you. Actually, earlier, John Landis, the composer. That's the story I'm thinking of. Somebody goes, they'll never pay for that. John goes, well, I grew up with his son. Give me the phone. Picks up the phone, and deal was done. For you, John, no problem. But, with the surrounding cast, and you mentioned theater, we talked theater earlier, and Frank Langella and all that fun stuff. He's been on the record saying that it was one of his favorite roles.
Yes.
But he had the line that was based off Richard III, which was a Shakespeare. I'm not in a giving mood this day. Bang. Yep. And he kills the assailant.
Beastman. I think Beastman eats it. No,
it wasn't Beastman. It was
Sorad eats it.
Yes. Yep. And, so I loved how you incorporated the theater and Shakespeare and all that stuff with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of bits like that. He and I would meet the night before, after the one shoot for the next day, and we go over the scene, and I'd bring in little bits, and he'd bring in little bits, and I'd rework it, and I'd type it up, and I'd bring it in the morning, and that would go into the book. It was great. It was a great working relationship with him, actually. Fantastic.
And he's one of those guys that I want to talk to so bad for everything he's done. But, and I'm putting it out in the universe now. Hopefully we'll make this happen. I mentioned him earlier before we started. Blade, Anthony DeLongis.
Yes.
I was recently visiting with him because he's been a friend of the show for several years. Love the guy. I actually had my own personal session with knife throwing and the whips and all that stuff, which was awesome when I was out at his property. But was it the Conan show you connected with him? Where did you connect with Anthony?
I cast him. He was in the Conan show. And and then when I created this character, I created those characters weren't in the script. I created those characters.
Yes.
Designed them at Landmark, and I had my sculptors do the maquettes. So all that stuff was done ahead of time. And I wanted this character Blade, and I knew he would be the right guy. And so they brought in a few people to cast him, but I didn't like him. And I finally called him, and that's when he had long hair. And I said, I really like you for this, but I have one question. You're willing to shave your head because he's got to be bald. And silence on the phone. He goes, well, let me think about it. Calls me back 5 minutes later. He goes, can I just do a skull cap? I said, nope. You gotta shave the head. And he goes, if I say yes, do I get it? I said, yeah, I think I can say that, subject to your agent making a deal and all that kind of crap. But yeah, if you're willing to do it, I know you have the skills, and so he said yes. The rest is history. I think that's one of his most memorable. Everyone remembers him as Blade.
And it's funny when I was out there, and I try not to fanboy too much. And like I said, I've built a pretty good relationship with him. But when I was getting ready, he was getting ready to drop me off at the bottom of the mountain so I can head towards LAX and stuff. I go, brother, I got one favor to ask you. He looks at me like, what's up? You normally don't ask. Had him sign the DVD and such. So that's cool.
Yeah, send that DVD out to me. Send that out to me. I'll sign it.
Well, you're coming to New York. So
I am. Are you in New York?
I'm in Philadelphia, but that's easy to make.
Okay.
Make
I'll
that
be there the week of the 6th. I'll be there the whole week.
We'll make that happen to come up for a cup of coffee or something.
Okay.
Obviously, I know folks are familiar with the challenges between budget and studio with Mattel, button heads, and all that fun stuff. Don't need to really jump on that. And we talk technology, so hence Orko and Battle Cat and all that fun stuff, because it was done pre-digital days.
Yeah.
But I was fascinated with, and still am to this day, with the technology at the time to be able to do the cosmic key and different things you've done. What was the biggest challenge tech-wise for the film for you?
Well, from a prop standpoint, the cosmic key, I remember, what's his name? Who did it? Ex-Lucas guy. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was the engineer. And I had told him what I wanted. I did a kind of really bad sketch of my own, but I wanted, since it was going to sonic, I said you would have the tuning forks, and what I wanted was all these different buttons that would be like, you have to do combinations. And then when you activated it, then the arms would come out, and each of these things would spin. And as they were spinning, it was spinning like this, and the other one in the center is spinning. And the guy was going, do you know what it's going to take to try and have these arms come up and they spin? And while they spin, it's spinning around this way. But he figured it out, man. He did it. It's awesome. That was interesting. That was a challenge. And then whenever we did, that was the days of the 65 millimeter effect shots. And Richard had just formed Boss. He had just left Lucasfilm and formed Boss Effects Company. And again, I pushed Canon to hiring Boss so we could have decent effects. But what I didn't know exactly was that every effect shot with the 65 millimeter cameras had to have a rock solid lockdown, which meant that they had to bring in the big camera, lock it, put sandbags on it. There could be no vibrations, and that's how they would shoot things. Because again, we were pre-digital, so that did cut in. I mean, almost every 65 millimeter shot took at least 2.5 to 4 hours to do. So those would eat into your days really quickly. The setup time, the getting the shot, and the dismantling it was a big deal. but that was a challenge and managing that. And then later the optical stuff, and then we got pushed towards the end. So I was never quite happy with the opening shot of Grayskull. There were a couple things I wasn't happy with, but overall, I mean, all the things that you think of, I basically did an uncredited rewrite. A lot of the fans don't understand that show started in America in the kitchen of Courtney Cox's character, and there's a banging on the door, and she's home alone, and it was my idea to open in Eternia and end in Eternia, so at least we could bookend this thing because it was being done for a budget. You couldn't for $17 million in those days. It was originally $15 million budget. You couldn't do Eternia. Forget about it. You couldn't do it. But I wanted to bookend it, and so I created that opening and I created the closing. And I don't know if you heard, but to get that big physical set, I convinced Canon that they would save money. Because I said, if I shoot half the movie on that set, the opening 15 minutes and the closing 20 minutes, if we can control the cost, because otherwise we're going to be on locations, rain, all the stuff that happens. And I was able to convince them to build that massive set because I was going to shoot at least 40 minutes of the film in it, which I did. I mean, basically, and it kind of worked,
Yeah, and the thing is too, with that stage that you're mentioning. It was 2 sound stages and a matting, and it was very elaborate setup for the time. And obviously it didn't happen, but it was designed by Bill Stouts, if I remember that correctly, where, the sword fighting and you wanted to do more, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So
he designed that whole area for a big sword fight, which they basically told me on the day of, we're shutting you down at midnight tonight. So I did some fast thinking and got the shots I needed to establish going into that ethereal world. And then we shot some stuff. And I borrowed from big Kurt Russell, Chinatown, big, not big time in Chinatown.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know the movie you're talking about.
I remembered the color wheel. They did this color thing during a battle. And so I brought that into my mind and said, when we shut down, I told my producer, Elliot Schick, when we shut down, we're going to let everyone go, but I'm going to keep the cameraman with a handheld camera. I'm going to keep this color wheel, have color wheels, have mist machines, have backlighting. And when everyone exits, we're going to do some, and that's when I think Delongis, stepped in for Skeletor for that.
Yeah.
And we got all that footage, and I just knew we'd edit it later. And then I knew we were going to have to come back and shoot the very end, which we did, and which I contributed part of my director's salary because they to do it.
Now, with something like that, and I only got a couple fan questions after this, and thank you again for the time. But I know that story where you contributed part of your salary to help get things done.
Yep.
With the business like it was then, were you able to see some of that on the back end for how things were accomplished? If that makes sense.
Yes and no. I mean, I didn't get that back directly, but my Directors Guild percentage of later video sales and stuff. Yeah, I got that money back plus some. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. You were thinking ahead. Okay, I'll give this up.
No,
now.
I wasn't thinking ahead. I was just thinking I gotta get this ending done. Otherwise, I had this meeting with Manam. I said, Manam, I've written a scene. We can shoot it in one day. Boss, I've written it. I think we can get it all done in one day. We have to do it, and it's going to cost $100,000, and we just have to do it. He goes, no, we don't have to do it. We don't have to do it. I said, well, what do you mean we don't have to do it? They'll just fight. They'll fight, and we'll just fade to black. We'll fade out. The end. I said, you can't end the movie like that. So people have no idea the battles that you have to go through to
exactly. And before I ask these couple fan questions to wrap the show, I do got to give you credit. And I'm not a comic book guy, like in the Marvel movies and stuff. But the reason I want to give you credit is because of, at the end of the credits, obviously Skeletor at the end there, and which is a trick that Marvel does now was doing with their films, that there was a post credit. You were doing it before. That's the first time that I can think of with film history that you had that tease because obviously everybody knows the story of there was going to be a part two. It didn't happen, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
So, and for the fan questions, John Grimmill, obviously, we answered your question during the conversation as far as was Dolph involved with the movie when Gary jumped on. He was already signed on. We touched on that. So, John, I just didn't want you to think I was blowing it off. Roger from the group wanted to know, did you draw inspiration from Skeleton Warriors from working on the movie?
No, Skeleton Warriors. I grew up. My Star Wars when I was a kid was Jason and the Argonauts. You know, seeing Ray Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts when I was a kid, and I always remembered the scene with where the dragon's teeth go out and then the skeletons pop up and fight, and that's always been on my mind. But I was actually playing. Robert DeLapp worked for me, and his son was about 5 years old, and it was during Christmas, and he saw a skeleton, a skull of a skeleton on TV, and he goes, "Bad, bad, bad," and I thought, wow, he's really young, and he knows at a young age that that's bad. A skeleton's bad, and I thought, I think there's a show. We'd already put Captain Power together. Captain Power was already happening. And I thought, maybe there's a show in that. Why don't we create? And that was the genesis for Skeleton Warriors, to be honest, was my memory of Jason the Argonauts and Robert DeLapp's son, Lee DeLapp, who reacted to a skeleton that he saw on TV, or maybe it was a magazine, I can't remember, but I remember him at a very young age going bad. And I remember thinking, there's something in our DNA, like dinosaurs. There's something in the DNA that at a very young age, you know skeletons are bad. And like you know what a dinosaur is. So I wanted to kind of tap into that, and we built a story around that.
Anthony Ryan asked, is there anything or any extra Easter eggs fans have failed to find over the years? He references things like Battle Cat on He-Man's belt or the Cobras on Evelyn's gauntlets, etc. And also, was there ever a plan to show an exterior shot of Snake Mountain in the scene? Hold on, I'm sorry, reading this wrong. An exterior shot of Snake Mountain. I will believe that's during the opening, so I don't know why I would ask that. But the control room he was asking about, was that meant to be at Gray Skull or Skull Mountain?
That was meant to be part of the castle in the the Snake Mountain idea. Yeah, there's an entire draft that I wrote where their journey to get to the throne room from the battlefield. You know how that we just cut and they made it. They and so there's a journey through Snake under the tunnels of Snake Mountain. There's a whole journey to get there that never got filmed. It's written. I have it in one of these drafts here. And so you would have seen Snake Mountain there. I don't know if you would have seen the exterior, but you would have traveled through the tunnels.
Yeah, because that spot I'm thinking of was when during the opening credits when they're doing the voiceover and all that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why I said what I just said. But
that shot is so funny. I so wanted the opening shot to be perfect. And that's one of the weakest shots was their rendition of Grayskull. And that's because Boss put that shot off until the end. And at the end, I was not happy with the way Grayskull was rendered. I wanted it to have a lot more power. I wanted it to come from a low angle up. But we just, you do run out of time at a certain point.
Juka wanted to know, and Juka, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. I'm bad with that kind of thing at times. Asked about the giant statues inside that you have talked about, that it's Eternia's ancients or elders and all that stuff. Is there a story to them, or was it just?
Well, the backstory to those statues was that, yes, these represented the pinnacle of Eternian society in their past. If you look at them, their greatest artist, their greatest scientist, their greatest doctor, their greatest warrior. It represented the great Eternians that came before and those statues are tributes to them. Yes. So that I mean, there's not a story, but that's the backstory to those figures. Yes.
Okay. And you just actually mentioned this, and this is a great way to cap things off for the night. Frank says, blessings from Norway. Please ask Sir Goddard for some Captain Power anecdotes if he's got the time. Now, mind you, the tie-in with, and you mentioned it earlier, Captain Power also was right after the filming of Masters. And I know you didn't make the Masters public screening in LA because you were in Toronto doing Captain Power. So is there anything you could satisfy Frank there?
The funniest anecdote is that Canada, where we filmed everything in Canada, they were just getting into the whole film thing. They were relatively new. And the only things that were being done up there were, cop shows and things like that, which they could do. We had to hire X amount of this, that. We're doing the effects. So there was an effects team, and they had to create the plates. Okay, the plates for the effect shots were the CGI. The guys, we had the unit that was creating the CGI villains, the Sauron and Blastar, that had to be composited in with the live action stuff, right? We had the big statues that were or cardboard cutouts so that the actors could make eye lines with the different robotic characters that were going to be added later. And we were the first show ever to try and create CGI villains on a weekly basis for an episodic television show, composited with live action actors. It was a big deal, almost impossible. But so the first 2 weeks of shooting is done, and the plates unit was coming in shooting plates. And I get a call from my guy, David Thornton, who was heading up my whole post-production outfit there. He goes, we have a problem. What? The plates. The plates, they gave us a bunch of slides. I said, what? Yeah, because when we say plates is it's camera work. It's moving camera footage. Just footage with the scene, with them talking, they're talking and thing. Well, the people in Canada were so new that they thought shooting plates to deliver to the CG guys were slides, a plate, a one image. So they had taken pictures of each of the sets with the actors that had been sent them on to the CG guys who said, what are we supposed to do with these? So that's a really good anecdote. And it just shows you how we were really, it was virgin territory in Toronto at that time. And the effects companies had no idea of this kind of stuff. And we were having to teach them as we go and making up for lost time, of course, because now we had to go back in and restage all of those sequences from the first 2 weeks. Any of the sequences that had the CG, we had to get the guys back. We had to get them off hours when they weren't shooting there. We had to bring them back and restage these things for the camera so we can get those real plates to the CG company so they could do their work. So that's the best overall one that is really, it's comical looking back, but it was not comical at the time. I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah. That's a great way to wrap. But Gary, where you mentioned it a little while ago about your Instagram and stuff, sharing notes and stuff, but where is the best place online for folks to find you, whether it be the IG or whatnot?
Probably LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn.
Right
or there's LinkedIn, Facebook, but LinkedIn's probably a good one. And Instagram, IG is Imagineer77. Yeah.
Right on. Gary, thank you so much for the time. I enjoy the stories, and definitely I will be talking with you to connect for a coffee or something when you're out here on the East Coast.
I'll be there the week of the 6th, so let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hi, this is Anthony DeLongis, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.